In today's episode of Rexfield Investigates, we are going to take it to the dark side. We are going to be discussing voodoo, juju, and all the things spiritual here on today's episode. So, Steven, hello, welcome. This is something I've wanted to do as an episode for years since I first talked to Brian Krebs about this.
Good old Krebs, shout out. Hopefully he likes that stuff.
Hopefully he does. Hopefully he does. So, how's it going, man?
It's going great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
I like to quote my old friend Captain Ron. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie. When asked about the Caribbean, he just looks at the camera and goes, "It's El Caribe, Spanish Maine, land of voodoo, hoodoo, and all sorts of weird shit."
Yep.
So every time I think about this topic, that line comes to my head. So
when it comes to talking the spiritual side, people don't even consider it or even realize that that's an aspect. So to go ahead and get this kicked off, let's start talking about like the angles of voodoo, kind of why we see this in cybercrime and why we need to account for it. So Steven, batter up, pass the ball to you.
So I'll start with the base of where it all comes in, right? Then there's a couple things that I'll touch upon. We can root it down to any superstition. I'm a big Phillies fan, right? So I have some stupid superstitions while watching the Phillies to think that may be an impact in having them win. You know, I have to wear my hat a certain way, or I have to be sitting a certain place, or I have a special pillow that my wife got me that has a Phillies flag on it that has to be turned just the right way. And I think that'll help the Phillies win. But it's the same principle, really, is that the people we investigate, the groups we investigate, use things such as Juju to not only enhance their fraud schemes, but then to use it to control or believe it gives them control over the infrastructure of their fraud schemes. So you have the use of superstition, and then you have the imposition of control are the two main things I want to take away from this talk, and really how it does reflect upon the world of cyber fraud, cyber-enabled financial fraud schemes, money mules, romance scams, business email compromise, you name it.
And I really like that you use the superstition aspect first, because for a lot of people who first hear of voodoo, they think of it as like this dark magic type thing. But the reality is when you're getting ready to watch a game, you probably have a certain ritual or sequence of events that will do to where you got to make sure that you have your bowl of chips just right. You've got your hat turned just the right way. You're angled in front of the TV just the right way so you can see the TV. So, like, you have that sequence of events that you're doing, correct?
I used to believe I had to have the right beer mug on the right coaster.
Yep. And it's one of those things where it depends on like how you have that mug, which way is the wind blowing will help play into that. So to dig into the understandings of this from the belief systems, when we talk about voodoo, that initially comes from Haitian Vodun, or essentially a spiritual practice that was done there to where you can do, again, these different rituals. A lot of times when you go talk to a native doctor who participates in Vodun, for example, it's not some spooky spirits that a lot of people will think of. A lot of times it's usually going to a person who has a type of knowledge where you go there with a problem and you're like, hey, I'm really struggling with this. What can I do to help me overcome that? So your native doctor will work with you and they will say that now that you have this thing, here is the sequence of things that you need to go from this state of being to this state of being. They might smash up some herbs, they might smash up some bone and have you take that. They might do chanting to go along with that. But in essence, when you look at the history of it, that's a lot where it plays into. So where Juju plays into this is when you look at a lot of the spiritual practices that happen in Nigeria, that's what they call it locally. And for a lot of Juju, again, it stems from those native doctors who are in that tribe where they're trying to just help their people be okay. They're trying to help their people survive. So they may go and have this ritual that, again, if you're upset or if you're troubled, here's the things you can do to not be upset and troubled. And that's a lot of the way where it stems from, is it's not some black magic that media goes and twists it to. A lot of times it's like, okay, how can I have this confidence to do this? Or instill this ability to go and do this thing that I'm really scared of doing. And that's a lot of what happens is it's trying to go and break that gap and be able to push through.
Exactly. A lot of these traditions really harken back to West Africa that then made their way over to the Caribbean and then developed into the sense that we popularly know voodoo as, but Juju is what they call it in Nigeria. Sakawa is what they call it in Ghana. And you actually have a group there called the Sakawa Boys that incorporate these rituals and practices into their cybercrime fraud schemes.
And very much likewise with the Sakawa boys in Ghana, you have that element of the Yahoo boys who were in Nigeria.
Yahoozy!
Yep, Yahoozy Yahoozy. Some good old references if y'all want to go look up some YouTube videos. Yeah, definitely go look up
Hmm.
some good Yahoo boy music. But
Yahoo, Yahoo.
very similar to the Sakawa boys, you have the Yahoo boys that will do similar rituals as well.
Yep. And so, in that sense, there's a couple different fold there. One, the first one I like to say is it amps up their fraud schemes, right? It's going to make their fraud scheme better than the guy up the corner who's doing the same thing. Because they're all, everybody's competing with each other. So they want to get that edge, that, that oomph, that one better step. So why not, some of the money they've gone from a prior fraud scheme, we're going to throw it all over the floor, right? And then we're going to get some type of animal or some sense of blood we can get. And you know, my juju says if I cover all that money in blood, it will bring me more money later. And in essence, that happens, right? And, we'll go kind of a little deeper in depth here with the confraternities, Black Axe, Buccaneers, Air Lords, all sorts of things of these groups that are responsible for a lot of these fraud schemes in West Africa and how they've been exported throughout the world, really believe in that tradition, that sense of tradition throughout, the employment of rituals in their activity. So it starts out with, their daily life as a tradition. It's very similar to as we talked about the superstition in sports. And then it is since now been construed into making their fraud schemes that much better. Next, you kind of have that aspect of control, right? You have the directors, the ones who are really putting these schemes together, but then they have to rely on a lot of people beneath them to carry out the hacking, the money mules to move the money, the mule herders, the people involved in the romance scams that we talked about previously to recruit some of those people. And so they want to, assert control over them, or at least believe there's that implied control, and they're using juju tactics to get them to swear an oath to something, a ritual involving herbs, crushed up bones, and again, the chicken blood, things along those lines, that from just a very scientific approach doesn't make sense. But again, it's that ingrained traditional superstition value that pretty much every human on this planet has practiced in some way, shape, or form over their lives.
Exactly. And even if you go and take a step back and look at Christianity in the Old Testament, there were
We gotta
even
be careful
reference.
there.
Yep. There's many references of animal sacrifices there. And if you don't take care of the animal correctly, then that's considered unclean. Even if you look at most major religions, there is some element of sacrifice there. So I
I
know
mean, the
so
Abrahamic faith, Abraham took his son Isaac up there, and just as he was about to sacrifice him with that knife, God stopped his hand.
Yep, exactly, exactly. And sacrifices such as that are baked in every religion. One of the areas that a lot of the attackers employ is money rituals. And a lot of the way that they see this and the way that they think of it is what is a sequence of events they can do to extract that money from somebody.
Make that money
So
come to me.
exactly. Make the money come to me. And it's not a case of them seeing it as stealing the money. They see the money as coming to them. And again, that's a big differentiation psychologically. In Nigeria, for example, when they go and try and trick somebody out of something, that is called falling mugu or kind of falling victim. So culturally, if they go and trick you out of something, then it's considered free game. And
Mhm.
that's a way a lot of the scammers will justify their behaviors. They're like culturally, well, if I trick you, then you give it to me. Ha ha, funny, I win.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, that's
that's
another
a
great addition to,
yeah,
superstition control, and now we have
yep,
justification as well,
yep,
using
yep.
that same principle. It's awesome.
Yeah, and with that, that's one of the ways that they do is again, they'll justify that behavior. So for some of the rituals that we've seen, we have seen them go all the way from small charms that they need. I've seen cases where they will need like tampons from a menstruating woman, all the way up to needing human sacrifice in order to become a better scammer. And in many of those cases, those are specifically called a Yahoo Boy Plus, where they will go and do that human sacrifice. They'll take that life, and essentially they'll go and receive that blessing to become a better scammer. And again, as you mentioned, it really pumps them up and makes them excited because they're like, hey, I did this, so I'm going to go get this money. And because they become more confident, it's twofold. So, one, they're going to be more confident to go and do that. And in addition to that, it also becomes a case of correlation without causation, where they're seeing that money coming in. They know that, hey, I was able to pull that money in, but they're not accounting for the fact of how understaffed law enforcement is. So it kind of comes this vicious cocktail back and forth where they're like, hey, this magic must be working. So I'm going to go ahead and keep doing it. But there's a whole lot more at play there.
The Nigerian confraternity investigations that we've done in the past together, we see their insignia, their paraphernalia, if we only find it during our investigations, during our warrants, what have you. And we're like, this is just odd looking, but those are the things involved. I have a very well known case partner I've worked with the better part of my career. He's amazing. I'm not going to say his name here. Maybe we'll have him on as a guest in the future. But I would work with him, especially these large scale operations that would go overseas, particularly emanating on the continent of Africa, to really inform our prosecutors about what we're dealing with and how ingrained these things are in the societies we're dealing with. So I set up a call, me, my case partner, and one of the best AUSAs, U.S. attorneys I've ever worked with. And it was supposed to be just like a quick hour-long call on updates on a on-the-ground investigation and prosecution we were carrying out in South Africa. And it quickly devolved into a 3 to 4 hour just she wanted to know and was curious on all these sort of things because during the execution of a search warrant at this now defendant's house, there was one locked room that we couldn't get into. That, the partners over in South Africa could not get into the room. Steel door, locked, couldn't get into it, right? One of the people we work with decided, hey, fuck that door. I'm going to scale the outside of the house and there's a window. I'm going to get in through that window. And he did. He opens that window, he gets in, and what does he find on the floor? A big old pile of millions of South African rand covered in blood. Dried, gross blood.
Wow.
And I wouldn't believe the story, if I'd heard from just anybody on the street, but I know the investigators involved in this case and trust them wholeheartedly. And it's just like, what the fuck are we dealing with? What have we really stumbled into now? And it really just put things in perspective that we're not dealing with a greed problem. We're not dealing with, a very simple, I want to make a quick buck crime problem. We're dealing with something that really is a deep rooted thing in people's beliefs. So not only are we fighting fraud schemes and scammers, we're also kind of fighting a belief structure, which makes things way more interesting, way harder, and way more complex and nuanced than I ever had anticipated coming into. I was originally a money laundering guy chasing money. Before that, I never thought that it would go somewhere along the lines of, the deep end spirituality that we stumbled upon. And then, we had to unbox that ourselves. And, you've come across it yourself in your trappings and your investigations. And, I think we've had a couple come to God moments, or you and I were sitting there maybe, at a happy hour or something. We start telling stories. It's like, hey, I've seen that too,
Mhm.
and it's just it's amazing how this has all become a part of the narrative of the things that we come across in particularly as we talk about here at Rexfield Investigates.
And that's a crazy thing too, because I remember like when you first told me that story, and like my reaction was probably like not what most people's would be, of like, wait, there was a pile of money covered with blood and dead chickens in the back of a room. What the hell? But like my reaction was like, okay, what else was going on? Like, what were they doing? And I remember when you were telling me the story, they actually talked to the investigators, or the investigators talked to them, and they were like, well, what's going on? Trying to look for an explanation of like, what is this? And the one thing that always caught me funny was that the explanation that the person gave, it wasn't, oh, hey, this is money here, this is blood here. But their explanation always hit me. And the explanation was, well, we needed a large pile of money because the magic here in South Africa was not as strong as the juju in Nigeria.
Yes.
So that's why we need a pile of money. So the question, it wasn't like, okay, what is that? But it was the justification in their heads of like, okay, why do you need such a large pile of money?
We need
And
that Juju megaphone.
exactly, exactly. It's like, hey, the magic down here is this strong. We need a little bit more and stuff.
Hmm.
And I know that in some of the cases that you've talked about, you found charms, you have found bottles in studying this stuff. Like there, I've seen cases where there's been other shrines to deities. And even in the case of Hush Puppy, who was one of the larger Nigerian actors who was arrested in Dubai, he was arrested with his native doctor. So again, that's how deep these beliefs go. And this is like some of the stuff that we're seeing on the ground.
Yeah, he was flying his doctor to Dubai, right, and having him
Yep.
be with him on the ground. It's
Yeah.
like that'd be like me bringing my priest to rob a bank.
That's exactly it. That's exactly
Hey,
it. And
Father,
like,
get in the car. We got some shit to do.
all right, sounds good. Holy Mother of Mary, Father, for I have not sinned. Go and help me extract this money from some
Yep.
folks.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
pretty much. May God watch over you while you're
yeah,
stealing his money.
yeah. So can you go into like what a confraternity is and how Black Axe, Sea Lords, Air Lords, and all those other folks play into this?
Yeah, so confraternities, really think about, they're just organizations of people, right? And whenever you join an organization, there has to be it's all about trust, right? And you and I know this about trust and some of the closed groups we work with as well. It's the same principle, right? These groups started in the 1970s in Nigeria, in the universities, particularly as groups of students who would get together, kind of have common goals, common things. And you hear the term confraternity. You can do a equivalency to, fraternities here in the US and our universities. I was a part of one. I'm not going to say which one, but we had our initiation rituals as well, that espouses sort of our common shared core beliefs, right? And the Nigerian confraternities, very similar things. They would do these rituals to initiate their members to show that they're worthy of their trust, right? And yeah, there's another group that espouses being worthy of trust and confidence, but I won't touch on that. But again, it's that level of trust to gain between the group members to show that, hey, I can trust you, essentially with my life in some way, shape, or form. So they create these really close knit groups, and obviously they grew. They're successful at recruiting, right? Recruiting their men, their people that they need, because one, to join effort. They're all helping each other out, right? We all know we rely heavily on our networks and joint efforts and partnerships in our endeavors here. Same exact principle. So they've come together. They started to form in the 70s, 80s, and as they've since kind of blossomed into and split out to groups that have criminality at their core, right? They are doing human trafficking, drugs. Obviously, we know them and come across them in cyber enabled financial fraud, wire fraud, and cybercrime. But you name it, they are doing that. And it's all these networks. And right. So now you have these networks built in and they're members, they're very structured. You have the head bosses, you have a council, you have people in different spots, like you have a sergeant in arms, you have the native doctor, person in charge of ritual, all of those sorts of things. And so now they have this group, and what makes it particularly hard for investigators once we kind of encounter one is that they don't want to talk to us. They will not, no matter what risk it is to them, whether that's imprisonments, fines, restitution, all of it, they will not talk and dime out who's actually behind the fraud teams because they've taken that trusted ritual oath. So there we have coming in that spirituality that they have, that bond in between each other to protect them and give each other that trust that, yeah, I will not snitch on my fraternity brother type thing.
And the
Get it?
interesting thing with that is like specific with Black Axe, which is one of the ones that we track a lot of. With a lot of their rituals, they will, if you break that oath, like they will literally kill you.
Punishable by death, baby.
Exactly, to the point where the reason that they're called Black Axe is their members are called axemen, where they will go and carry a hatchet. So there's also been a lot of cases in Nigeria where you'll have the confraternties go against each other. They're cutting and slicing each other up.
Mhm.
For those who actually break the oath, it's an axe to the head. And it's obviously a very graphic thing. And like for a lot of those, when you're talking with them, yeah, they're not going to break that oath. The
Mm,
other thing, as you mentioned too, the human trafficking elements. So specific to Black Axe, we were aware of them running a lot of the human trafficking rings in many parts of the world. So, for example, if you look at Black Axe in Italy, for example, they actually run a lot of the prostitution rings out there. And for some of the things when it goes on control, I was watching a couple documentaries just about how the human trafficking works. And what they'll do is they will recruit women from the tribes and put them through a quote unquote spiritual protection ritual.
mhm.
So it might be a 2-day thing where they're going to protect them from the evils, but essentially that emotionally locks them in and they find it very hard to get out of that. So even if you were trying to talk to that human trafficking victim, like they're not going to talk to you. So it becomes very hard to actually get that information from them.
Yeah, and a couple points to build on that. They use almost the same kind of psychological techniques in those same recruitment that have to do with romance scam victims. You know, they go through that same coaching and grooming and, you know, get them in that same mindset that, hey, this is where my loyalty really lies. And, I'm going to send all my money because I trust them and believe them. But then I'm also going to launder funds unwittingly anyway, for these fraud schemes because, this is all what it's supposed to be. And they're so believable, with these fraud schemes, with these romance scam victims. And they're using a lot of the, again, psychological justifications that they've developed through the Juju tactics to put it on there. And then, what I found interesting? I need to read into this more and kind of do some research. But, we know about the scam compounds in Southeast Asia with the cryptocurrency investment scams and just the absolute carnage and damage they're doing across the world. I didn't really, and I don't, it's only anecdotal from things I've read. I haven't really talked to anybody boots on the ground, but there are West African actors there that are helping with the recruitment and management of the people who are being human trafficked there to conduct these fraud schemes against their will. I didn't really even put that together until recently that, hey, yeah, that's there too. So, it's this basic juju that has now been globalized, right? It's juju on a global scale. It's just mind
Yeah, and
boggling.
it's absolutely fascinating because like for even the case where someone is tricked into the compounds, they're manipulated to believe this thing is happening, only to later find out that this thing didn't happen. Or in the case with the people who are put through those spiritualist rituals for prostitution, they're thinking this thing's going to happen, but this thing over here happens. Or romance scam victims, they will go and have this belief and then later find out when law enforcement comes to them, they'll go and identify this other thing here. And a lot as humans, one of the things that is extremely unsettling for us is when we have our internal belief system challenged. So like when you go and have a romance scam victim who is in the scheme and you're talking with them, they're very hesitant to actually understand, or actually they're very hesitant to come out of it. And I know Rick Allen Ross did a lot of discussions and work around this very similar phenomenon that actually talks on cult deprogramming. And
Yeah,
essentially,
yeah, we haven't even touched on cults.
no, and that's the thing is like when you go and work with somebody who's in this scam, that's very much the psychology that you're working with is somebody who you're now challenging their belief system. I know that when I was doing a lot of this work and kind of some material I had to read just to be able to wrap my head around what was going on, there was also elements of meditation and hypnotherapy that can play into this. So, for example, with your romance scam victims or someone who's actually going to try and cash a check or going to a Bitcoin ATM, one of the anecdotes that has been shared is that that person was like truly in a trance. So what will happen is they will blindly go and do this thing so that that's something that they believe is happening. So again, it's not like some woo trance type thing. It's just that altered state of consciousness where they will do what they believe is right to get out of that. And a lot of times with the victims I work with, it's usually a case where they will be doing this thing to not feel this uncomfortable thing. So if I'm not going to get in trouble for sending that money or feeling like I'm the cause for my lover not getting their money, then I'm going to go ahead and do that to help them.
Yeah. Wild world. Wild world. So this is where, we kind of touch upon, hey, these things exist and they show up every day, everywhere around the world, even here in the US. This is where, potential victims really need to be mindful about who they're interacting with online because there are some, you know, bigger things at play than generally we think about in our day-to-day life. And it's crazy to really think about. Ronnie, got anything else we want to touch on this or I don't know.
No, I think that's it. I think we're good on time. So
Here, wait,
yeah,
one more thing. I do gotta do one more thing.
go for it. Go for it. And for those who were on the audio podcast, Steven has walked away from his desk and now he is coming back. There he is.
I gotta have my special coin. Gotta
Nice.
bless it with some juju.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Gotta
what's the
go and
coin?
yep. Fly Eagles fly.
All right. Go Phillies too.
Go Phillies. Go
Baseball season.
Phillies.
Opening
Yep.
day tomorrow. Actually tonight.
Nice.
If you need me, that's where you'll find me is yelling at the screen, doing stupid shit to hope the Phillies win.
Gotcha. So then for the boss from the last podcast we did that had the baseball bat, was it a Phillies bat?
No, it was a it was a company agency branded Louisville Slugger. It was
Nice.
sweet. I wish I had one of those. It's one of my favorite things. I'll have to give him a shout out one day when if he ever lets us. But one of the best bosses I've ever had, and his just motivational tactic coming out, banging on my keyboard, go, "Hey, do this! All right, you're the man with the baseball bat." So
Yep. Don't mess with the juju. Okay, I'll do it.
don't mess with the baseball bat. One and the same.
Yep. All right. And with that, we are officially over with the episode. Make sure you smash that like, hit that who's what's it, and you know what the routine is. All these other content creators say it. So go do the thing in order to help us out. So with that, Rexfield Investigates out. Take care, everybody.